Okay, let's move on to instant messaging uses. I've got that broken out between positive uses, and be careful based on, I have added a few items, and be careful with use category based on compliance. Like on the previous slide, we wrapped up with the compliance issue with brokerage firms using instant messaging. So positive uses, basically you want to start with a short greeting on the person that you're going to start the IM with. You want to make sure that they can talk to you right now. So you want to say good morning, good afternoon, how's the weather, whatever, if you haven't chatted with them earlier in the day. Ask the person if they currently have time to have the chat through instant message. Always provide positive news, a quick question, or a status, or additional information if someone's asked you for that information. But you want to keep it short. In the conversation, you go ahead and ask one question. Don't roll several topics together. Give the other person time to answer your topic, and then engage back and forth. That way it's a true conversation. In other words, don't use IM as an email. Type only one thing at a time, and then when you wrap up the conversation, indicate that the conversation is ended so the person on the other end is not waiting for your next question, because there may be a delay sometimes. So be sure to always end the conversation. Over on the compliance side, we want to be sure that we know the person. Typically on internal systems where you have to be registered for that use, it's okay to have that. And you typically know the people. But now we're starting to collaborate with outside organizations that also have IM, and you may not know who's initially pinging you. So you need to kind of go through the process of identifying who that person is, that type of thing. Never use IM for delivering bad news. You should never do that. That should always be either email or direct phone call, especially in client service type situations. Only use for short conversations, or use email or pick up the phone, okay? Now, I have added an internal document of about 1,400 shorthand IM descriptions, and that's for the older generation that's having to really use instant messaging, with the younger generations in the workforce that is their primary vehicle for communication today, is instant messaging. So it will help for a reference sake. You always want to make sure who you're IMing with is either online, but then if they're away or busy, then you're going to have a big delay in your message. So you may want to pick up the phone or go send an email at that point. Okay? And don't use IMs to change meeting times. That's what email and calendaring systems are for. Let's go talk about social media considerations. In just the last 2 or 3 years, there's been a change in social media. First of all, nothing is private. And social media use within the private sector for personal use has been out there for some time now, with Google+, with Facebook, and MySpace, and some of the older social media sites. Now businesses started using social media for advertising, for marketing needs, for networking, and really collaboration type needs. So you have to be very careful about crossing over between personal versus business in today's social media sites, especially for those professionals that are doing both. So we've added 2 slides to kind of discuss that a little bit. Most businesses will pick no more than 5 social media sites to kind of conduct business on. The 3 primary ones are Google+, YouTube, Facebook, and then LinkedIn. So they'll pick 2 other resources of lesser known sites, or Twitter or something like that. They do focus their research and analytics to track success. So it's very important not to combine your personal use on a social media site with business use. So if you're actually driving marketing campaigns through social media, make sure your personal phone is not synced up to anything that may come across there, because you'll never get any sleep. So some of the rules, we've added personal use and business use. So personal use, or very simple rule. Never discuss business on your personal. Did it stop?
Yeah.
Oh. Never discuss personal on your personal site. Never discuss business stuff. And then on the business side, I gave an example of something that is reposted into the social media sites that was a marketing campaign for a new product or service. And you can kind of see an example of that. And if you're using some of your personal networking in the business realm, you got to be sure you understand how to follow up on questions and how to refer them to the proper people if you get feelers out for those types of activities. So it's kind of important to understand the proper uses for social media today. Okay, let's now move over to electronic meetings. I've got 3 areas I want to discuss: the preparation, how you keep people focused in an electronic meeting within a virtual team concept, and some of the etiquettes around how you actually run the meeting and conduct yourselves. So what's important on electronic meetings today is if you're doing a face-to-face meeting and everyone's at the same location, that is somewhat more informal where you don't necessarily have to do a lot of preparation work. When you're running a virtual meeting through electronic medium, you have to do some preparation. And let's talk about that a little bit. You got to decide on the technology. If you have vendors or other partners involved in the virtual team, they may have their own system. So you have to decide what kind of system you're going to use to run the electronic engagement and the time frame. And you want to pre-test that software on the equipment from all your invitees, especially if it's a new system, ahead of time. You want to understand your invitee list from the different teams that make up the virtual team, and making sure that you have everyone identified. And then you want to establish the agenda and have that embedded in your meeting request that goes out, that goes to everyone's calendar systems to actually schedule them. And within that agenda, you want to identify your topics, your time frame, and why you need them. You also want to ensure that the URL to access through the internet, the systems, the teleconferencing bridge information, and access codes if those are required. You want to, ahead of time, create any visuals needed that you may be presenting to start this discussion or guide the discussion or working session. And those may be PowerPoints, PDFs, or Excel workbooks. If it's just a brainstorming session, then you would use the whiteboarding facilities within your electronic meeting. And then when you start the meeting, you want to do a roll call. I remember even as far as 3 years ago, we had a default system that would not really give you a roll call who was on the call. You'd have to verbally go through and ask people to identify themselves. Since then, the systems are a lot more robust and identify who's actually on the call now, by name, by phone number, that type of thing. But we get in meetings where we wouldn't really know who was on the call. So you have to be careful. So I'm a big believer in doing a roll call, review the agenda, ask any questions, then dive in. And then ensure that you know who's recording the minutes of the meeting and the follow-on actions. So let's talk about how to keep people focused after we've started the meeting. One thing that has kind of occurred is when you're in a virtual setting, you may be going across different time zones, different geographic regions. So when you may be in your office location, you may have someone in Europe or Asia that they may be at their home residence. They may be at the coffee shop. You may have some people attending the call that are currently traveling, so they may attend from the airport location. So you want to ensure that you cut down all the background noise. So you want to do mute all type technology within your conference call, and then through the chat session facility, indicate the questions that are being asked and how to take people off of mute all. That adds to the quality of the meeting and really removes a lot of the interruption factor. You want to focus on just 1 or 2 topics. Each topic should not go over 30 minutes in length. So if you're exceeding 2 topics, then you're into a multi-hour meeting, a working session. You need to plan breaks for that within your agenda to keep people focused, or else they lose interest. So give them a chance in the break to go refresh coffee, go to the restroom, lunch break, whatever it may be during that time of day. If it's a video teleconferencing, you want to limit your body movements. It adds to the quality of the teleconference with videos also being used. And you want to ensure the type of clothing you're wearing. You don't want loud, bold stripes, because that doesn't quite show up well. It becomes a distraction on video conference. You want to use more solid colors like I have on now. You want to ask questions to specific people and ensure that they're engaged in the meeting. It's okay to go ask certain questions, and that allows you to see that they're engaged. And then you want to wrap up the meeting by discussing what the next steps are, who the owners are for the action items, and then follow up with the publishing of the meeting minutes, that type of thing. Let's look at online electronic meeting etiquette now. I have do's and I have don'ts. And you can kind of combine teleconferencing and video conferencing. You want to be courteous to other participants. You may be communicating on a regular basis with people that you never met. In a lot of cases, I've found that teleconferencing works a lot better if you've had some face-to-face contact with those individuals in the past within the virtual team. You want to speak clearly. So you get some people with a very soft voice, especially if some of those individuals are from India, a different culture. When they're attending a conference call for the first time, they're unsure of the participants, the social order status of the participants. So you want to ensure that everybody is speaking clearly on the teleconference call. You want to keep your body movements minimal if it's a video conference to keep the quality of the video up. You want to dress appropriately, especially if it's a video conference, and ask specific questions of certain people to ensure that they're engaged. The don'ts are, don't have any distracting sounds. I don't know how many times I've been on conference calls where the speaker, everyone else is on mute, but the speaker, also you hear his dog in the background just going nuts for a couple of minutes. And it really is distracting to the overall meeting, the content, and the focus of everyone. You don't need to shout at each other over the phone. You want to speak clearly, you want to speak in a very clear voice, but you shouldn't be shouting and screaming at people on the phone. You want to watch distracting movements. Now, the hardest thing when people get onto a large teleconference call is to understand when they should talk. You should always use the chat session available to indicate you have a question and that you'd like to be asked at the next gap in the discussion to add your point or add your input. Never interrupt the current speaker. Now that speaker may actually pause to think about his next item. So you have to be very careful when you jump in and when someone's not currently speaking. And that's hard to tell sometimes, so use the chat to understand if you can then join the conversation. No side conversations. That usually happens when someone's in a conference call and you have a series of people in one conference room, and you have other locations where you have multiple locations also on that call. And the people within that one large conference room are having side conversations. You pick up all that on the microphone, so it really adds, it creates quality problems to the overall meeting. So you have to be careful about that. Don't cover the microphone when you're talking.